Hello, everybody. Jason here. It is August 27th, and that means I'm 43 years of age today. So, with that said, I thought I'd throw together a little quick something here by way of celebration, share it with you guys, and leave it at that. So, I'm not going to go into a lot of banter as I'm wont to do at the beginning of these things. So, let's just cut right to it, shall we? Here we go. Being as I work at the library, all kinds of stuff I didn't know about. Now, the electronic resources, the on the site, there's all these links to databases through our library site. I've been perusing some of those and finding some rather interesting things. Now, uh, went to some government history document site through what is called EBSCO host. I don't know if you can find this not through a library or if you have to go through the library site or any library site to access this stuff. I should know this because I work there, but a little unclear on that. Apologize. But again, found some interesting stuff, and in particular, I found this thing called 82nd Airborne Paratrooper at Normandy. Why do I care about this, other than the fact that the topic interests me, of course, since I've been spending so much time doing shows, talking about and designing games, but I guess more the latter, designing games. I mean, Advanced Platoon Leader is getting churned out, and this strikes home when I read this. And it's history. I talk about my past and the dumb stuff that I hold as memories, but can you imagine holding these things as your memories? And this guy is let's see, authors Ed McCall, and the source is Military History, June '97, Volume 14, Issue Number 2, Page 30. Comes with some photographs. I didn't see any photographs. I'm going to do my best to read this to you guys and without too many throat clearing interruptions. So, without further ado, here goes. On June 6, 1944, Sergeant Bill Dunphy's battalion was one of the few that hit the right drop zone. As they jumped into San Mariglis, the commander carried an American flag because, as Dunphy explained, he realized the historic significance of what we were going to do. Saint Mariglis is a village filled with stone houses on the Cotentin Peninsula in the Normandy region of France. Today, the town's peacefulness belies the importance it had in the Allied invasion plans of France in 44. Situated on fairly high ground so that it dominated the approaches all around it, the little village was important enough to become one of the initial objectives of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division during the invasion. San Mariglis sat astride the main highway between Paris and Cherbourg and between the Meurthe River and the flooded areas just inland from the beaches on the right flank of the proposed Allied landings. If it was not captured and held, the Germans would be able to send reinforcements to their units defending Utah Beach. Consequently, one-third of the initial strength of the 82nd Airborne Division was allocated to either capturing St. Mariglis itself or securing the northern and western approaches to the town. The 82nd's plan was relatively simple. The 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment under Colonel William E. Ekman was to be dropped just northwest of San Mariglis. Its mission was to capture the town with its 3rd Battalion and secure crossings of the Meurthe River near La Fère and Chef du Pont with its 1st Battalion. At about the same time, the 2nd Battalion was to establish a defensive line north from Neuville-au-Plain to tie in with the 502nd Parachute Infantry of the 101st Airborne Division. Now, we're almost to the interview, 2 more paragraphs. The capture of San Mariglis was the only mission that the 505th, or for that matter, the 82nd, was able to carry out according to plan. Ain't that something? The members of 2 other regiments, the 507th and 508th, were widely dispersed during their drop, with many of the men landing in the swamplands along the Meurthe River. The mission of the 1/505th was dependent upon the ability of the 507th and 508th to occupy the west bank of the Meurthe River in force. The 2/505th was ordered away from its mission to reinforce the 3/505th in San Mariglis. One man who made the combat jump in Normandy and participated in the fight for San Mariglis was Sergeant William Dunphy, who was recently interviewed for Military History by Ed McCall. Normandy was the third of Dunphy's four combat jumps with the 82nd and the third of six campaigns in which he participated during World War II. Military history asks, when did you enlist? And I'll just say MH from here on out. When did you enlist in the Army? And D for Dunphy. D, in April of 42. MH, how old were you? D, I was 19 at the time. MH, what made you decide to volunteer for the Airborne? He replies, primarily the extra $50 a month we were paid. You have to remember that those were tough times. My pay was only 21 a month, so an extra 50 was a lot of money. MH, how long was the jump school back then? 4 weeks. Where did you go after jump school? Joined the 505th at Fort Benning, Georgia. The regiment was in the process of being formed. There were only a few men in each company. When did the regiment get shipped overseas? April of 43, we went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina in early 43 and joined the 82nd Division. From there, we went to a camp in Massachusetts. We weren't allowed to wear our jump boots while we were there. We had to put them in our duffel bags and we were issued leggings. The whole idea was to keep anyone from knowing that an airborne division was going overseas. We jumped out of Brooklyn and went to Casablanca. Was the fighting over in North Africa when you got there? No, but we weren't committed to the fighting there. The four combat jumps you made were Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, and Nijmegen. Is that right? That's correct. How many others in the division made four combat jumps? I was told by my first sergeant at the end of the war that only a couple of hundred men in the division had made that many combat jumps. And what was the first combat jump like? I don't think we had as much anxiety with the first jump as we had with later ones. The main reason was that we hadn't been shot at yet. We were looser, but still apprehensive and a little scared. How much equipment would you typically carry in a combat jump? I had a moosehead bag to start with. It hung below the risers. And it were 3 days' rations, a couple of extra grenades, detonator caps that were used to activate mines, and assorted personnel items. A rifleman would carry a bandolier of his moosehead bag and a couple more on himself. Anyone carrying the bar or Browning automatic rifle would have it in an equipment bag strapped to his side. The barman would be the second man out. After his chute opened, he would release the bag, but it would stay attached to him by a cord. About how much did all the equipment weigh? Oh, I'd say in the neighborhood of 80 pounds. At one time, they had a wild idea of our carrying mines with us. Luckily, that idea was killed, and the mines continued to be dropped in the equipment bundles. Were you in the first group to jump into Sicily? Yeah, we were. Actually, the company I was in, first company, had a separate mission. For some reason, the battalion got off course and flew back out to sea. We were on the proper course. Our company commander, Captain Fulmer, had gone the night before and talked to the lieutenant colonel who was leading our flight of troop carriers. We were to go into a volley, so instead of flying the standard V-shaped formation 9 planes wide, Fulmer put us into 3 Vs, each of which were 3 planes wide, 1 platoon per V, so we could get into that narrow valley. When the rest of the planes fumed around, Captain Fulmer, who was up in the cockpit, could spot the Acate River in the distance, so he told our pilots to keep right on going. Consequently, we were probably on the ground before anyone else. In fact, the rest of the battalion landed in the wrong spot. We hit it right on the nose because Fulmer had the foresight to go and talk to the leader of the troop carriers without old Cannonball Krause's, our battalion commander's, approval. If old Lieutenant Colonel Edward C. Krause had known about it, Fulmer would have had a big reaming. Of the 4 combat jumps you made with the 82nd Airborne, which would you say was your toughest? And he says, probably Normandy because of the anti-aircraft fire. Also because we had more terrain to cover prior to jumping. See, it was SOP, or Standard Operating Procedure, when you made the landfall to stand up and hook up. We did that in case the plane got hit. If it did, we were ready to get out of it. We had quite a ride in Normandy due to the turbulence and the pilots taking evasive action. There we were, trying to stand up in a C-47 loaded to the gills, with the plane bouncing all over the sky. Normally in a combat jump, we jumped out at 600 feet, 800 tops. But in Normandy, they must have let us out at 2,000 feet. And the interviewer says, wow, that's high. You're right. After my chute opened, I looked around and the Germans were still filling the air with tracers. And Saint-Mary-Glisse, they had a flak unit set up in the park. What really scared me, though, was when I looked down and I could see C-47s flying under us. We had lost 3 men in a training jump in Camden, South Carolina, when a C-47 flew into them. How close were you to the drop zone in Normandy? Oh, we hit the right drop zone. Our battalion was one of the few that did hit the right drop zone. Didn't part of the battalion actually drop into Saint-Mary-Glisse? Some of the men did, not many though. The mayor of Saint-Mary-Glisse, Alexander Renault wrote a book, and he said two men descended into a burning building. Now it would seem to me that they were probably dead before they hit the building. While our old chutes could not be guided as well as the new modern ones, we could guide the chutes to a degree. And if a man was going into something like that, he'd slip the chute as best he could to avoid it. I've gotten the impression that they just went in there limp without trying to do anything. The 1962 movie, The Longest Day, puts a lot of emphasis on the members of the 82nd who parachuted into San Mariglis. But it was you and others who landed outside of the town who actually took it, right? Yeah, we had San Mariglis secured by 4:30 a.m. Were the bodies of the dead paratroopers still hanging when you arrived? Yep, but we cut them down at daylight. After that, what did your unit do? Shortly after lunch on the 6th, 1st Company, the company I was in, was ordered out towards Fauville. There was some high ground there. We got out there, and according to General James Gavin, we ran into a German battalion. He told me that when I had a chance to talk to him after the war, we got ambushed, and our company commander, Captain Swingler, was killed. For some reason, he was out with the point where he shouldn't have been. I believe he didn't think there was any Germans between us and Fauville. Swingler, Sam Vanich, George Irwin, and Felix Sandolfer were killed there too. We opened fire, and Edwin Jones, who was up there with him, got out unscathed. Our executive officer was still in England in charge of the rear echelon. He got that job because he was worthless. Anyway, the lieutenants had a debate on who was to take over. My understanding is that the ranking platoon leader didn't want to take over, so another one did. During all this confusion, either they contacted the battalion or the battalion contacted us, and we were ordered back into San Mariglis. Had you heard anything about the Allied beach landings by that time? No, not until that evening. Were you worried about the beach landings, or did everyone just say, well, we're here, so be it? Oh, we were concerned to the extent that we wanted them to get in there and give us a hand. But honestly, I didn't realize we were only 4 miles from the beach. I thought we were farther inland, so I wasn't anticipating being relieved for 2 to 3 days. Not necessarily being relieved, but just getting some help. The 3rd Battalion's jump went well, all things considered. The vast majority of the battalion landed in the drop zone, and within 1 hour, the battalion commander, Colonel Cannonball Kraus, had collected a little over 100 of his men, along with one drunken Frenchman who proved invaluable as he informed Kraus about the strength of the German garrison in San Mariglis and led the Americans into the town. After sending 6 small detachments to move around the town and set up roadblocks, the remainder of the battalion moved in to secure the town with orders to conduct a house-to-house search but not to fire their weapons. They were to use only grenades, knives, and bayonets. Resistance was slight, since many of the German soldiers were still asleep. 11 Germans were killed, 30 were captured, and an unknown number fled to the south. When Krauss personally cut the German communications cable leading to Cherbourg at 0430 hours on June 6, the town was officially secured. Later, he raised the same American flag that the 505th had flown over Naples on the flagpole beside the town hall. San Mariglis became the first French town liberated by the Allies. Still, the town was far from safe, for as daylight broke and the bodies of the dead paratroopers had been accidentally dropped into San Mariglis could be seen and were cut down, the Germans intensified their shelling and began their counterattack. At 0930, the Germans started their first counterattack from the south with 2 infantry companies supported by 3 light tanks and 2 self-propelled guns. During the German counterattack at 1000, the 2/505th, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin H. van der Voort, joined the 3/505th that's 3/505th at San Mariglis after detaching 1 platoon to occupy and defend Novelle to the north. Since the 2/505th came into San Mariglis from the north side, it was decided that they would occupy the northern portion of the perimeter and leave the southern part to be defended by the 3/505th. The arrival of the 2/505th meant that Krauss had a reserve of companies E and I from his own battalion, which he stationed in the middle of the town. What did you think of the portrayal of your unit in The Longest Day? The man John Wayne portrayed was Colonel van der Voort. He was in command of the 2nd Battalion. We were the 3rd. Our battalion was the unit that liberated San Mariglis, not the 2nd, even though they reinforced us later. In fact, old Cannonball Kraus carried an American flag with him on the jump. I'm sure he realized the historic significance of what we were going to do. San Mariglis would be the first town liberated during the invasion. Second, the movie showed us having crickets, clicking toys with which we'd identify ourselves to each other in the dark. That is totally wrong. On the 101st, let's see. Only the 101st used crickets, not the 82nd. There were instances of isolated plane loads of the 101st landing in our area, and they were using those crickets. Our guys asked them what they were doing, making so much noise. After the German attack was beaten off, Kraus sent 80 troops from Company 1 south, then east to strike the Germans in flank. The detachment only found a German convoy moving south, which it destroyed with grenades and returned to Saint-Mary-Glisse. Next, Kraus decided that Hill 20 had to be seized. Hill 20 near Fauville was occupied by what was estimated to be an infantry battalion reinforced with artillery and tanks and appeared to be the center of the German resistance. Kraus again chose my company to do the job. Leaving Saint-Mary-Glisse, the company ran into the same trouble that all units, Allied and German, would experience in Normandy, the hedgerows. Hedgerows made cross-country navigation difficult and long-range location of the enemy next to impossible. They also blocked out sounds of movement and fighting in other locations. The company moved out thinking there were not any Germans between them and the objective, but there were. The company commander and 3 other men were instantly killed when they walked into an ambush. The company's attack faltered and the unit was pulled back into the perimeter late in the afternoon of June 6. The Germans were also having trouble. The 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, under the command of Major Friedrich August Freyer von der Heydt, had not been able to contact anyone from its higher headquarters, the 709th Division or the 84th Corps, during the night because the French underground had cut the telephone lines. Finally, at 0600, Major van der Heydt was able to reach General Erich Marx at 84th Corps headquarters. The orders were to attack with his regiment and clean out the rear area of the 709th Division between Carentan and Saint-Mary-Glisse, after which he was to seal off the beachhead at the causeways. After making a visual reconnaissance from the church steeple in Saint-Côme-du-Mont, from which he could see the massive invasion fleet, von der Heydt ordered his 1st Battalion to advance to Saint-Mary-du-Mont, and once the 2nd Battalion was online with him, to continue their advance to relieve strongpoint W5. 2nd Battalion was to advance to Saint-Mary-Glisse and then turn toward the coast to relieve the 795th Georgian Battalion near Turqueville, as well as to protect the left flank of the 1st Battalion. The 3rd Battalion was to move to Carentan and provide the regiment with a defense in depth, while the attached 3rd Battalion 1058th Regiment was to stay in Saint-Côme-du-Mont. The 1st and 2nd Battalions started their movements at approximately 1900 hours. Late in the afternoon of June 6, an 82nd Airborne Division task force consisting of 90 infantry from the 325th Glider Regiment and a company of tanks from the 746th Tank Battalion under the command of Colonel Edson D. Raff landed at Utah Beach. Their mission was to link up with the division at Saint-Mary-Glisse. After moving across the causeways, the task force reached Le Forge, about 2,500 yards southeast of Saint-Mary-Glisse. There they found out that infantry from the 4th Division had been stopped by enemy fire from Hill 20. Colonel Raff decided to try an armored assault on Hill 20, and he knew that a glider landing was scheduled to take place at 2200 hours, approximately halfway between the position and Hill 20. In 2 attempts on the hill, Raff lost 1 armored car and 3 tanks. Organizing his men for a 3rd assault, he discovered it was too late. At 2100 hours, 1 hour early, the gliders came in and were greeted by intense enemy fire from the hill. The short firefight was over in about 10 minutes, but then practically every glider had crash-landed. Still, there were numerous survivors who were collected and assembled at Le Fort. The same fate awaited the gliders landing north of Saint-Mary-Glisse. They either landed between the lines or within the German lines. That night, Saint-Mary-Glisse came under attack from both the north and south, and the attacks on the outpost at the Meurthe River crossing to the west continued. From the north, Saint-Mary-Glisse came under attack from units of the 105th Grenadier Regiment and the Messerschmitt Assault Battalion. These units would have attacked Saint-Mary-Glisse earlier, but the platoon that Colonel van der Voort had detached when the battalion had been ordered away from its original mission at Noivelle and sent to Saint-Mary-Glisse had done an excellent job of holding them off. From the south, the town came under attack by units of the 2nd Battalion, 6th Regiment, which had somehow managed to slip past the tank infantry task force in the Forge. The Meurthe River crossing continued to be attacked by units of the 105th Grenadier Regiment, as it had been all day long. It was a long night for the men defending Saint-Mary-Glisse. The interview continues. What rank were you in Normandy? I was a sergeant and assistant squad leader. Our platoon leader, Lieutenant Carter, asked me to carry a bazooka into Normandy. I really didn't want to, but I agreed if Jim Beavers, my partner in crime, could be my ammo bearer. The bazooka was dropped in an equipment bundle, right? How were you able to find it at night? When I was in the service, we always had trouble finding bundles at night just doing training jumps. The bundles were supposed to be salvoed in the middle of the stick, and that's where they put us. I saw the bundle on the way down and told Jim, who I could also see. There's that bundle over there, Jim said. I see it. I said, I'll meet you at the bundle. I landed on one side of a hedgerow with the bundle, and he landed on the other. I had the bundle partially unrolled by the time he joined me. Did you shoot any German tanks with the bazooka? No. In San Mariglis, the bazooka got hit by shrapnel, which penetrated the tube, blowing away the firing mechanism. I found a bar right after that, which was my favorite weapon. Why is that? They were accurate if you fired them in 3-round bursts. I could speak with some authority with it. It was a good weapon to have in a tight spot. And I'll stop here momentarily and let you consider that. Reflect on any games that specifically represent that. You know, so many games are caught up with rate of fire and all this stuff, and machine gun this, machine gun that. But that's pretty telling. I thought when I read this, that he says they were accurate if you fired them in 3-round bursts, and in so many people's minds, you just hold that trigger down, you're just going to mow everything down. Well, no, you're not, because it just caused inaccurate fire. Let's continue. The morning of June 7th brought no immediate relief to the airborne commanders. They still had no contact with the beachhead. Finally, at 0800, Lieutenant Winton resumed from the headquarters of the 4th Infantry Division with information on the current situation. Then at 0900, a radio message was received from the beachhead and communications were firmly established. At the same time, RAF's task force, along with 8th Infantry Regiment under Colonel James A. Van Fleet, attacked the remaining Germans on Hill 20. German resistance was limited since the 2nd Battalion 6th Fallschirmjäger had been ordered back during the night when their regimental commander realized they were in danger of being cut off. To the north, San Mariglis came under its last German ground attack. The strongest yet attacking were the 105th Grenadier Regiment and the 7th Army Sturm Battalion, supported by 10 self-propelled guns, I assume those would be Stugs, and 3 artillery battalions. The attack pushed to the outskirts of San Mariglis, where it was finally stopped. The failed attack quickly turned into a rout when the Germans discovered they had been cut off by the 746th Armored Battalion. San Mariglis was then secured and could be used as a base of operations. The interview continues. What sticks in your mind the most from Normandy? The interviewer asks. 2 things. First, a follow-up on D+10. My battalion was attacking north of San Sauveur-le-Vicomte. We went through the town to a railroad track on the other side of the town. Right across the railroad track, there was a German tank sitting on the road. There were 2 North American P-51s flying around above, so we signaled them and pointed out the tank. I got up on top of the railroad embankment, and when they came down, I kept pointing at the tank with my bar. Well, those dirty birds started shooting at me and dropped a bomb. That's when I went back over the side of the embankment. The machine gun fire looked like little twinkles on both of the wings. The dropping of the bomb was icing on the cake. Not that the machine gun fire didn't chase me down off of there. What did the German tank do? Nothing. Just sat there. Sat there for maybe 5-10 minutes. Then backed away. After he left, we crossed the road and went to some woods on the other side. We figured that the tank couldn't get into the woods. The problem crossing the road was that the tank was firing a flat trajectory straight down the road. We also had to cross a small open field before we could get into the woods. It was not a pleasant experience. Between the C-47 pilots letting us out too high and the P-51 strafing us, I didn't have too high an opinion of the Air Force by then. Was that just your squad? No, it was the entire platoon. The company was following us. What was the second thing that stands out in your mind from Normandy? That on a day-to-day basis, fewer and fewer eyes stared back at you. We took a lot of casualties. How many days were you in Normandy before you were pulled out? I believe we weren't pulled out until D+32. What did you think of the fighting in the hedgerow country of Normandy? Now listen to this. It was terrible. There was only about 100 yards between the hedgerows. And again, I'm going to pause briefly and ask you to reflect on games and how they depict the spacing of typical hedgerow country. I think a lot of them don't do it justice. But anyway, he says there's about 100 yards between the hedgerows, and The Germans would let us get out in the middle of a field and then open up. When they did, we were dead meat. We didn't have any of the light armor associated with an airborne unit. To alleviate that problem, they decided that we would advance at night. When we did move out, we advanced towards Nouvelle-au-Plain, hedgerow to hedgerow. We'd stop at each hedgerow, two of the guys across the field. Then when they'd get to the other side, they'd look through the hedgerow, make sure it was clear, and come back and get the rest of the platoon. After exposing the scouts to danger in this manner 2 or 3 times, we would change the scouts because it was a very nerve-wracking job. Now the interviewer asks, why didn't your platoon send 3 men across, leave 2 there, and send 1 man back to get the rest of the platoon? Wouldn't there be concern the Germans would sneak in when both men had left to get the platoon? And he says that was a mistake on our part. One time, Dussault and I were taking our turn when the plan misfired. We had checked out the next hedgerow and gone back for the platoon. We told him it was okay, and everyone started across the field. We got back to within a few feet of the hedgerow, checked out when the Germans had opened up on us with rifles and machine pistols. Everyone hit the dirt, and we started throwing grenades while they were throwing potato mashers at us. Luckily, our grenades were superior to theirs, so we won that hedgerow. We only had 1 casualty, Lieutenant Kroner, our acting company commander. A potato masher had landed near him, blowing dirt and gravel into his face. He wasn't pretty, but he wasn't badly hurt. How popular were the 2 of you after that? No one even thought anything of it. It's just one of those things that happens. Also, nobody probably wanted to complain, because if they did, they'd have to do the checking the next time, and nobody wanted to do that. Any other specific memories from Normandy? No, after a few days, they just began to run together. Another day, another hedgerow. We were on our own most of the time. They used us. They used us as the assault force. There was one time around Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte when I saw 2 German soldiers standing up on a hedgerow and pointing their guns to my right, where our guys were moving. I opened up on them with my bar and they went down. Then I dropped down because I had given my position away. I detected movement to my left front on a hillock. Thompson came upon my left and Lieutenant Clark on my right, and I told him that there were Germans in that hedgerow. I zeroed in on that hill. Just wasn't satisfied about that movement. Then all of a sudden I saw a guy who stood out against the skyline like a peacock. He had leaves and branches on his helmet. I zeroed in on that helmet, and as he rose up, I could see his face. Then I squeezed off a burst of 3 rounds, and he disappeared. He's just outlined against the sky like a peacock. How many men did you have in your squad when you jumped into Normandy? I believe 12. How many guys got together after the jump? All of us linked up after the jump. Now, how many of the men in your squad were left when you were finally pulled out of Normandy? I'm not sure, but probably half made it out. My old first sergeant, Howard Melvin, sent me a list showing the names of all the men from the company who were killed or wounded in action. The company had 21 men killed and 54 men wounded in Normandy, and does not include any prisoners of war or missing in action. How many men were in the company at the start? According to the TO&E, Table of Organization and Equipment, we were supposed to have 145. However, I don't believe we ever had that many men in it. It was probably closer to 120. So more than half your company became casualties. You were in the same squad throughout the war. Weren't you the squad leader by the time the war ended on May 8th, 45? That's correct. Now, how many men were still in the squad from when you joined it when the war was over? Just 2 of us out of 12. Tommy Thompson and I. In fact, we were the only 2 guys left from the original platoon. You could say that we were refugees from the law of averages. You also have to remember that a lot of the men were replacements of replacements. Looking at the painting of you on the wall, I see you received 2 Purple Hearts and the Bronze Star. When did all that happen? Actually, I was wounded 3 times. Got a scar here on my leg where shrapnel went through a boot in Normandy. Wasn't evacuated for that. All they did was wrap it with gauze and they kept on going. In Holland, I got shrapnel on my shoulder after we had been in there for about 10 days. That's why I say for me, Holland was the easiest operation. I wasn't in there long. The other time I got wounded was in the Bulge. We were moving down a road going to attack False, Belgium. Right behind us was one of our own artillery units. One of their guns had been firing short rounds all night long. Anyway, when we were moving down that road, a short round burst in a tree directly over us. No one heard it coming. The gentleman who was directly behind me was killed, and Jesse Clark, who was across the road, caught shrapnel in his leg and foot. I was knocked down, and the butt of the bar mashed my middle finger. Clark was evacuated, but I wasn't, so my injury was relatively minor. About 2 weeks later, or maybe even longer, they pulled us back to Theo, Belgium for rest. I took that opportunity to go back to the battalion aid station. They sent me on back to an evacuation hospital. There they set the finger and put a tongue depressor on it. I was supposed to stay there, but I went AWOL back to my unit. How about the Bronze Star? We were just outside of Cologne at a listening post along the Rhine River in 45. We saw a North American B-25 shot down on the other side of the river. It was about noon. Since we didn't see any parachutes, we assumed that the crew had been killed. In any case, we were not going to send patrol across the river in daylight, since any movement on our side brought down mortar and artillery fire. At about 2, I heard someone yelling from across the river, "Please don't shoot, I'm an American." I crawled down the edge of the river and got behind a log. Told him to stand up, that we wouldn't fire. He stood up and was wearing a U.S. Army Air Force uniform. Told us he'd been captured, but he said that his captors had agreed to a brief truce long enough for us to come over and get him and 2 other badly injured officers. I radioed platoon headquarters. They were about 300, 400 yards behind us in a building. We were dug in along the floodplain right along the river. They gave permission, and we got an ambulance and a boat down there. I got 3 volunteers, Tommy Thompson, Tony Cronetti, and a medic named Schmidt who spoke German to go with me. Took off all our clothes except our pants. I told our guys, if they start shooting, you start shooting, and we'll go in the water. When we got to the other side, a young German lieutenant came down. We started getting out of the boat when the German lieutenant started yelling. Schmidt said he was yelling, telling us not to get on the ground, that we should stay in the boat. We were allowed to have 1 foot in the ground and 1 foot in the boat. We got the 3 wounded guys on board, but the Germans kept a staff sergeant who had parachuted out and had broken his leg. I guess they just couldn't take care of the 3 they gave to us. All 3 of them were ambulatory. When we were there, a young German officer, he looked like he was about 20, looked at Tony and asked Schmidt, "Ist das ein Jude?" Schmidt assured him that Tony was Italian, even though we all knew that Tony was half Jewish. The officer then stepped into the boat and looked at Tony's dog tags. After reading them, he seemed satisfied. Afterwards, Tony mentioned several times how happy he was that his father was Italian and his mother Jewish, and not vice versa, and that he had been raised a Catholic. What do you consider to be your most memorable experience in the entire war? VE Day, that was the most thrilling because I thought, thank God I made it. A lot of guys didn't. And that's it. I believe, yeah. Because page 13 lists for further reading. I'll go ahead and read that. For further reading, former U.S. Army officer Ed McCall suggests Night Drop by S.L. Marshall, The Longest Day, of course, by Cornelius Ryan. Or For a German Viewpoint of Normandy, Invasion, They're Coming by Paul Carell. Now, I don't know. No offense, Paul. I don't know how much I would recommend any of Paul Carell's writings. Either way, that's that. It looks like there is yet another page of stuff, but I don't know if this is relevant. I'll leave it at that. You guys get the gist of it. I just wanted to share with you guys something that I thought was interesting to kind of commemorate or celebrate my birthday and history, and something near and dear to my heart. As I'm sure a lot of you also hold this particular subject close to your heart as well. So that is that, as they say. And until next time, thanks for listening and keep gaming.